Hey guys, it's Ashley and this is Downright Bookish, and today I'm going to be talking about my January wrap-up. Before I get into the books I read, I want to go over my goals for the quarter. I know I've talked about my goals a lot, but I think it's good for me especially to kind of go over what my reading goals are and how I did for the the month of January. So before I get into the books that I read in January, I want to go over my reading goals and how I'm performing on that. I know I talk about my goals too much in this beginning of this year so far, so if you're just interested in hearing my review of the books, I will put a timestamp in the description and you can just jump to this time I'll put on the screen if you just want to watch the book reviews. So let's just get into the goals that I have. So I have about 5 reading goals, I believe, that I'm keeping up with this quarter. The first is to read at least 2 books a month from my TBR that have been on my TBR at least a year. This goal was really meant to help prevent me from just reading the newer books on my TBR and focusing on some of the books that have been on my TBR for a long time. I did not read anything that was on my TBR for a year in the month of January, but I am quickly catching up with that in February so far. I am a little behind, but I think I'll be caught up by the end of February, which will be nice. My next goal was to read 2 books that are over 500 pages this quarter. I did not read a book that was over 500 pages, but I am in the process of reading The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. That is also over 500 pages and also qualifies for another goal that I'll talk about in a second. So I'm kind of doubling up on some goals, so obviously those are going to take me a little bit longer because it's a longer book. Whatever. I think since I only have to read 2, I'm kind of in a good spot with that one. The next goal is to read 3 adult fantasy books, so 1 per month. And I didn't read anything in January, but again, I am reading The Final Empire, so that counts as both a book that's over 500 pages and an adult fantasy. So that kind of lumps those goals all up in one. So then the next 2 goals are kind of very similar too, is to read at least 1 nonfiction book a month, which I did complete, and read 1 book about writing a month, which I did complete. So overall, doing okay on my goals. I'm not too stressed about it, I guess you could say. Yeah, I'm making progress and I definitely am happy with what I've been able to accomplish so far. Without further ado, let's get into the books. So I read 3 books in January. The first being Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi, and I have a full review of this book on my channel. This is his debut adult novel. I guess it's fantasy. I would say it's more like speculative fiction. It's a very interesting little short novella. Follows 2 main characters who are brother and sister. The sister has magical powers and the brother is incarcerated, and it's about their kind of coping with him being in jail and her coping with her abilities. And obviously it deals a lot with race. They're both African Americans and there's some futuristic elements to it. I will link my full review down below because I think that goes into a lot more detail about what this book is about, but I generally really enjoyed this book. It's the first piece that I've read from Tochi Onyebuchi, and I do have his other book, War Girls, and the first book in the series, Beasts Made of Night. This book really got me interested in checking out those books. I think his writing is very interesting, and I think he's able to capture a lot in this small package. It definitely deals a lot with the anger towards feeling powerless about systematic racism, and just the feeling of being incarcerated and what that does to a human, and especially a Black male. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It's really short, so I definitely recommend everyone pick it up, especially if you're into issues of race. This book is not straightforward in any sense, but I definitely think it's worth kind of dissecting and looking into because there's a whole lot to unravel in this piece. And the next book I finished, and that is Outlining Your Novel, Map Your Way to Success by K.M. Wieland. And I talked about this book a little bit in the writing books that I want to read this quarter. At that point, I was really enjoying it. I thought there was a lot of actionable tips to it, and I still feel that way after I finished the entire book. I think this is a really good place to start if you're kind of struggling with not really knowing how to get started on your book, or not really sure if you're more of a pantser or an outliner. I think this book does a really good job of like laying out steps that you can do to really get started. And it's very specific. I really dislike writing books that are kind of general, and a lot of my criticisms with this book is more the author interviews that she does after each chapter. So she interviews an author after each chapter, the same questions for each author, and it's basically like, why do you outline? Why do you think people should outline? Do you ever pants certain parts of your book? What is your process for outlining? Things like that. A lot of the answers become very similar, where it's like, oh, you just gotta do what works for you. And I really hate that answer, because obviously when someone is seeking, trying to get help for like trying to figure out how to outline, doing what's best for them doesn't really make the most sense, because they don't know what's the best process for them. So I like that aside from those author interviews, she really provides a lot of in-depth, like step-by-step to kind of really work out how to outline your novel. And then obviously you'll kind of adapt that to what works with you once you've like practiced and tried it a couple of times. But like just giving the person an advice of like, oh, just do whatever works is just not good advice in my opinion. I think overall this book was good, but I could have done without the author interviews, especially because I really wasn't familiar with any of the authors either, so they didn't really stick with me at all. I really enjoyed each of the chapters. I think she has, again, really great advice, and she provides a couple different options that you can do to really generate some inspiration for your book. So I have been using this on occasion. I really haven't been doing that with my writing goals, like always, but when I do sit down to write, I've been using some of the tips and tricks she's provided in this book, and it really has helped me. So yeah, I really have enjoyed this one, and I have a couple other books from her, so I'm glad that I liked this one, because I went ahead and bought some of her other books without first reading this one. But now that I do know that I think I'm gonna enjoy her, I'm excited to check out the other books that she has written. And finally, I listened to The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates' first novel, so he's really well known for his 2 nonfiction books, Between the World and Me, and We Were 8 Years in Power, I believe. Both of those deal a lot with race. We Were 8 Years in Power talks about Obama administration, so he does a lot of like nonfiction and really brings in a lot of personal experiences from what I've heard. I haven't actually read those 2 books yet, but they are on my list to read. Anyway, I wanted to listen to his first novel because I tend to enjoy novels better, and I thought maybe that would be a good place to start with him before diving into his nonfiction work. And a lot of people have been talking about this book and giving it wonderful praise. I mean, it's on Oprah's book club. It's gotten a lot of hype, I guess, especially in like the African American community. When I started this book, I really had no idea what this story was about, like had no idea. I didn't even read the synopsis before diving into this, so really was kind of going into it completely blind, and I kind of regret doing that. And usually I don't, but I really regret doing it for this one, because had I known what the book was about, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. It's a slave narrative, so we follow this character named Hiram, who is a slave, and his mother died when he was very little, and he's also the plantation owner's son. So at a very young age, he becomes kind of like right-hand slave of his brother, who is going to inherit the plantation, but his brother is not really the best equipped to kind of handle this plantation. And then it slowly goes into more of like this underground narrative where I don't want to spoil it too much, but yeah. So there's also like this magical realism element to the story. The main character has a magical ability. This is going to be really hard to talk about because I know a lot of people love this book, but I just did not like The Water Dancer. I really wanted to like it, but I really didn't like it. I really didn't like any of the characters. I thought the main character was almost too perfect. He was very smart. He had a very like good memory, but he really lacked like any emotional appeal to me. I wasn't really emotionally invested in his story at all, or the romance. To me, that was one of the weirdest parts about the story, because it's almost the glue that keeps the story going is this romance, but it feels so, it doesn't really work for me, I guess, to say it. But yeah, there are just a lot of things I really didn't enjoy with this story. There's also, I don't know how much I can say without spoiling it, so I might make another video where I go more into depth about why I don't like this book, because I think I have some valid reasons for not liking this book, but I don't want to give too many spoilers in this video, so maybe I'll do a whole spoilery review of why I don't like it. But overall, I think as I got more towards the end, because I was really close to DNFing this book and just being like, whatever, I was pretty satisfied with how the book ended. I thought that was probably one of the best parts of the book, is kind of the conclusion of the story, but the story kind of ambles through the most of the book. And my other issue is that the magical part felt a little sloppy. It didn't feel like it kind of connected well with the other elements of the story, the other plot lines, and it kind of felt like it was just added in there to make the story unique in some kind of way. I also just really didn't enjoy the writing all that much. It's a very, very lyrical writing, which I generally tend to enjoy, but I felt like the writing and the self-contemplation, because we're being told this story through the eyes of Hiram at a later period in his life. He's like retelling the story to us. He does a lot of like introspection and a lot of thinking, and not a lot of action happens, which is fine, but it gets a little muddled. I just was confused a lot about what was going on, where he was, and I just didn't feel grounded at all in the story. So yeah, it was a very disappointing read, and it's sad to say that because I know Ta-Nehisi Coates is a really popular author, especially in the African American community. This in no way has put me off like wanting to check out his nonfiction. I think I will read his nonfiction and probably end up enjoying it a lot. I just think maybe fiction is maybe not his forte, at least not this first book. I mean, maybe in the future he might write something better, but this just really wasn't for me, and I know it's going to disappoint a lot of people, but I really did not like The Water Dancer. So yeah, I'll definitely film another video where I go into more detail about why I didn't like The Water Dancer, but for this, that's kind of like my basic thoughts on it. It was just like very hard to get into at the beginning, dragged on a lot, and I just really wasn't invested in any of the characters. Didn't really understand where the story was going. It just lacked a lot of like connection, and for me personally, I will say that the end did do a really good job of bringing, like, if I had DNF'd this, I probably would have rated this book much lower than I actually did. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars because I felt the ending was very good, or much better than like the entire rest of the book. But if I had DNF'd it, I probably would have given it like 1 or 2 stars. So yeah. So those are the books that I read in January. Off to a great start with February. Like I said, I'm reading The Final Empire. Enjoying it. It's definitely a very good book, but I don't know if it's worth the hype, in my opinion. Ooh, that's probably going to be another unpopular opinion. But yeah, I also listened to Circe and loved that book, so that'll be in my February wrap up, and I'll talk more about that then. But yeah, thanks again for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys very soon with another one. Bye!